Hi, everyone. I want to thank you for being with us this evening. The title of our conversation is The Power of Protest in Transformative Policy. And what that basically means is we're going to have a discussion tonight about harnessing the energy, the honesty, the integrity, the intensity of the demonstrations that we've seen in response to the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and so many others. The need to take that conversation that we had on the streets, demanding equality, demanding that we be seen as whole human beings, and demanding equal protection under the law and changes in the law where they are necessary. This conversation that we're going to have this evening deals with those issues. And I am delighted to be joining in this conversation with three very active, authentic voices in our great capital city. Patrick Hall, who is serves on many boards and is very engaged in Trenton's campaign to end the new Jim Crow. Reverend Charles Boyer, who is the pastor of the Bethel AME Church, and he's a co-founder of Salvation and Social Justice. And Pastor, we're really glad to hear with this coming together and sort of reinvigorating of our faith community and our social action at the same time. And last but not least is Lydia Thornton. She's an advocate for prison reform and is a formerly incarcerated individual and has transformed her life and is probably going to share with us a pathway that others can experience. So what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is to ask you all to envision the time and space that we're in today and describe it for me before we get into substantive detailed discussion about it. Just express to me, a single word that represents this time and space. I'm going to start with you, Pastor Boyer, and then go to you, Mr. Hall.
Mm-hmm. So one word. So you giving the super challenge to a Black pastor, one word. Transformative.
Thank you. Mr. O'Neill Hall?
My word would be confident.
Confident?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Ms. Thornton?
My word would be hopeful.
Hopeful. Let us start with you, Ms. Thornton. What exactly makes this era, this time, so hopeful to you?
Well, I think for me, the fact that we have so many people, particularly young people, involved and interested, and actually that they're angry, that they've noticed what's happening in the world. I personally haven't seen this kind of energy since the 60s and early 70s, to have people on the streets and people, talking about the injustices that are happening. So it gives me great hope that we have a generation that's coming to say no more.
Thank you. Mr. Hall, I'm interested in what you had to say. I think your word was confident. In what are you confident?
The reason why I'm confident is because I've been at this for a long time, and I've had conversations with a number of folks who don't understand what's happening with racial justice and unjust. And the reason why I'm confident is because millions of people got the opportunity to see something that few of us have seen. They actually seen racial injustice unfold right in front of their eyes. And there's a lot of folks, and I'm not just talking about white folks, but just folks in general, who always push things off or justify things to say, oh, that person was running away, or that person had a bad record, or that person was arguing, or that person was giving a police officer a hard time, and things of that nature. So for the first time, millions of people have seen something that we've seen for years unfold right in front of them, undeniable. And it has given such a burst of energy to the cause. That's why I'm confident that we're on to something that's going to really develop into something good for everyone. That's the reason why I'm confident.
Thank you. And I believe, Pastor, you said transformative.
Yes, yes. And first, quickly, let me just, Congresswoman, thank you for all your fierce advocacy. I think you are, in many ways, the manifestation of what we've come here to talk about today, in your fierce advocacy that you do for us in DC. I say transformative because, as you know, the whole arc of the Black existence in this country is one of struggle, and it is one which every time the struggle sees progress, there is a backlash. Struggle, progress, backlash. Donald Trump was the latest instance of that backlash in response to the election of Barack Obama. And now we are in the place where we are seeing the response to the backlash from mostly people of color, mostly Black people, which puts us into a place of transformation. And as we have seen historically, that every time when we are activated in response to the backlash is always in response to progress. And when we respond to the backlash in a way that is affirmative to Black life, we see transformation. And I think we are seeing this in ways almost unlike any other time in our history.
How is it sustainable? Because I think that I agree with you, and I suspect our other two guests agree that we've seen these push and pulls, these active times, these respectful times, these publicly moving equality times happen, and then there's a backlash. What is it that we should be doing differently this time to ensure that this response to that backlash is sustainable, is transformative on more permanent basis, and gets us where we need to go in terms of equal protection under law and opportunities as well?
That's a great question, because I think the failure in times past has been the failure to teach history and to teach truth and to teach civic engagement. And so one, it is critically important that our young people understand and know the arc of justice in which they are aligned right now, because that disconnect has happened. And I really fault, in many ways, not fault, but I think it has been a failure of the church, the Black church in particular, to continuously teach the history, because we cannot be fully dependent upon the public school system to do that. Because for me, coming from a faith standpoint, I believe that this is a very spiritual engagement that we are in. Secondly, it's critical. We no longer have civics taught in schools the way they were years ago. So most young people don't even know how to demand through the system what is necessary through the democratic process. How transformation comes, which is why we see eruptions in the street, because there is no other, young folks do not feel any other way or know any other way to express their discontent with the system. And so knowing the history, where we are, how we're connected, and knowing how to bring about transformation through civic engagement are the critical pieces that are necessary for this to be sustained.
Thank you. Mr. Hall, I was looking at your short bio that you had submitted to us, and I see that you really have been involved in a lot of boards and commissions and working groups and things of that nature in the capital city. And so I wonder if you want to tag on to that. How do those entities within our community communicate to our community and keep us engaged so that we don't allow the moment to pass or the movement to diminish?
A couple things. One of the organizations I'm involved in is the Campaign in the New Jim Crow. There are several others, from the African American Culture Collaborative, you name it. But what we did about 6 years ago, let me back up a little bit. My daughter, who's 26 years old, when George Floyd had gotten murdered and protest was going on, she's down in Mississippi. She called me up and she said, "Dad, I got a question for you." She's 26 years old. She says, "Why are we still protesting? It doesn't seem to help." She says, "We've been protesting before. It doesn't seem to help." And I had to explain to her that there are a lot of organizations and individuals behind the scenes that are doing things to change the laws. I said, "You don't see that, but they are." So I sent her some links, and she thanks me today because it was a passion of her to get involved in the legislation part, but she didn't see that at first. So education is very important, especially with the younger group, because their attention span is so quick. You got to do something very precise to them. So one of the things we did in the Campaign in the New Jim Crow about 6 years ago is we built a solitary confinement cell. It was a replica of it, and we had that thing all over the place, and people were able to taste and feel and I'm telling you, it's such a difference. If you gave a person a bill and said, "Read this," most of us that are in the field don't read the whole bill. If you give them something they can taste, they can touch, they can feel, and they can get it right away and quickly, education and knowledge of something, it works much, 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 much better. So my take on it is create something that's very, very quick to catch on to. It's like Ban the Box. When we were working with Ban the Box, when we went inside the heart of Trenton, what we said to them, instead of trying to go through all the process, we just said, "What happens if you go in and you fill out an application and a certain, employer?" And they says, "Well, I feel like as soon as I walk away, they throw it right in the garbage can." That's exactly what they were saying, and in some cases, that's what it is. I said, "And why is that?" "Because I got a record. As soon as they see that record is done," I said, "What if you're able to get that interview without the application going in the record, and you can." You don't have to put on there that you have a record. And they says, "Oh man, I fill out 100. So you see how I didn't go through the whole bill. I just went over, how would you like to be able to get that interview without it? So something quick and precise and creative. And it has to be something on a level that most of the people who don't vote, which is unfortunately a lot of young ones, have to be able to relate to right away and right in their face. That's what I feel.
I'm sorry, I hope we get back to that question, because everything doesn't happen quick and in a hurry. And that whole Ban the Box movement took years, because I was in the state legislature when we first started working on it. And I'm very concerned about the fact that we know government doesn't move as quickly as we'd like in most instances. And we got to figure out how to continue to harness that energy and have those individuals that went out there and voted for change, have them continue to be engaged and be willing to figure out what is the reality of pace, and what are the signals that we should be looking for to determine whether or not who we voted for and what we voted for is moving in that direction, even though it hasn't made that major leap from the then to what we want. And so I hope we get back to that. I wanted to ask Ms. Thornton, because Patrick raised Mr. Hall raised like a serious issue about the Ban the Box and filling out applications for jobs, and having people have a predisposition to your candidacy simply because you had spent some time in prison. And then when we look at the prison population, we know that there's really something more wrong with society than there was necessarily with the people who were in prison. And that we certainly are trying to remediate some of that through new laws and things of that nature. But what has been your experience about living on the outside, having access to what the protections and the services and the provisions that are supposed to be there for everybody, and how does that link to keeping people with similar experiences as yours engaged and willing to go to the voting booth, deal with things not moving fast enough, et cetera, that kind of thing. And anything else you want to add to that 75-second question I just asked you?
Thank you for asking it. And then again, I thank you for having this conversation and including me as well. It's tough. I mean, I had a career before I went inside. I had work experience, job experience, and an education. I'm fully aware that the majority of my counterparts may not have that. And they may be coming out, we call it reentry, but many people haven't even been in society as we think of it in the first place. So filling out an application or now going online to fill out an application is a challenge. Just in some cases, learning how to use a cell phone is a challenge. Much less, we finally have gotten to a point where legislatively we're supposed to be released with New Jersey state ID and Medicaid card and all these things, but it doesn't happen. It's not happening properly the way the law was written. So if you come out and you don't have a place to stay, because ban the box is great for employment, doesn't work perfectly. A lot of places ignore it, but it's there. What it doesn't cover is housing. There are still multiple areas where you can't get a place to live if you have a record. I went through and applied to every major apartment complex in Mercer County. There's only 2 that would even take my deposit to allow me to think about renting there. The rest rejected me because of my record. So if you start out with nowhere to live, questions about, whether you can get your medication you might need, et cetera, and you're struggling to find a job, how are you going to find a job with nowhere to live?
Yeah.
So it's a very multifaceted thing coming back out into society again, is my short answer.
Yeah, I think that you just sort of highlighted something for me. I'm not sure we're doing a good enough job in communicating what is available and what the law says, and that you can't be denied housing for certain reasons anymore. I don't think that I remember when I was in state government in the state legislature, because I was both in the executive branch and the legislative branch. We addressed issues of returning citizens, taking them through a process to prepare them to be able to fill out applications, make sure they have their IDs, make sure they have their Medicaid cards, make sure they have access to their medication and things of that nature. And a lot of that was supposed to be proactively done by the institution from which they were being released. And I wonder if our returning citizens have access to all of that information, because I think from my observation, in a lot of instances, we haven't messaged enough about what's happening and what you are entitled to, what your rights are. For instance, to what extent do you think, and I'm going to leave that open to all 3 of you, to what extent do you think that the whole police Justice and Policing Act that we commonly refer to as the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, to what extent do you think that our community knows about it, and to what extent do you think that they recognize the connection between all that wonderful demonstration that took place for months and months and months, the most diverse and large demonstrations we've ever seen, and the actual piece of legislation that was crafted? I'm going to start with you, Mr. Hall. To what extent do you think, since I think you really got your feet out there in the community?
Yeah, I think that just like the individuals who vote, most of the individuals who really vote advocately, they have a real sense of the connection. But I think beyond that, it got completely lost. So I would have to say, and it's funny how we were just talking about this. It seems like the same percentage of people who vote are the same percentage of people who actually understand what's going on in legislation. So there's an awful lot of individuals who I think is disconnected with what's happening with legislation, what their rights are and what they're not. And it's just, especially the younger you get, the less likely they seem to know. That's what we're finding.
Well, Reverend, what about the individuals that were actually out there marching, carrying banners and speaking about justice for Mr. Floyd and justice for Breonna Taylor and justice for Ahmaud Arbery, and justice in policing? To what extent do you think that they recognize that there's something happening in Congress right now? In fact, there are changes in laws that are even happening in certain states, and what they actually did, the connection between being engaged, being basically peaceful in their protests, being substantive, and having the kind of will to stay out there and to raise that issue. To what extent do you think that they're informed?
Well, I think the leaders of those of many of those protests, and I mean like the organized leaders, I think many of them probably being tuned in may know. But I think because the time frames typically from the moment of unrest to the moment of the piece actually moving, I think that disconnect, and back to the discussions around kind of attention span and all of the things that are going on in young people's lives, I think there is a disconnect. And whenever there's a communications piece, there has to be real intention. And I think this goes back to the real intentional means of doing civic education, because you can take real-time instances of what's taking place. Imagine if we were teaching civics in our schools, and as the moment of unrest happens, the discussion is going on about what should happen, and then the bill gets introduced, and that's being reflected to children in the classrooms, and now they are making the connection because it's a real-time dynamic education, not merely hoping that we have 16, 17-year-olds watching MSNBC, which is not going to happen, right? And so it's either through it's a piece of that, and then there's also the how to connect that kind of legislation in a way to grassroots activists like Brother Hall, like Lydia Thornton, that are engaging with folks every single day to do social media campaigns that are making the connection so that young people can see that they actually have started to make a difference.
Let me proffer two questions here. Mr. Hall, I was in that cell that you created. I was in that solitary confinement cell that you created, and it was an experience I never want to have. But a couple of years ago, I was in it. Is there confidence? Are you getting any sense of the hopefulness and the confidence because we have a new administration, we have a new majority, as small as it is, in the Senate, and we have a majority of Democrats in the? Does that make any difference in the minds of those who were out there protesting? Do they discern a difference between what we had and where we are now?
It's funny because we are seeing much more individuals who were not particularly concerned about politics or legislation. We are seeing more of them more involved now, only because they got to see a president who they consider was totally against what they believe in. And so that sort of created some sort of hey, I got to really find out what's going on. And when we speak with individuals, we always say, don't just look at the person, look at what the person is, what the person's platform is about and things of that nature. So we are seeing more individuals that are more engaged. The same thing with George Floyd and the situation with Black Lives Matter. Just like my daughter and her generation of people, they had conversations now about, well, what bill is out now, or how, because they're so interested in seeing what has changed, what is going to change. They're so interested in that now. And I find it fascinating because for her whole 26 years, she's never said anything about a legislation or anything until I introduced it to her. And now she's like, okay, when is that one coming through? How does that process work? And this whole thing. So we are seeing a lot more of the young ones doing it. But these are people who either have someone there that can feed them a little bit of information, or someone they can ask questions and can get some information from. But the ones from our programs, from lots of parents who are incarcerated, we have a program called Men for Hope. Those individuals are totally disconnected because they don't have a lot of people around them that they can actually get information from, or they can ask information to, because their parents are just, completely out of sync and out of touch with it. So that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. And for those who can get access to information, Reverend, is the information readily accessible, or does one have to do a real kind of nerdy exploration of the internet to see what's happening in the areas that they're particularly interested in? And Black Lives Matter is not just about policing. It's about access to healthcare. It's about access to communities without guns in the hands of wrong people. It's about economic justice and jobs and environmental justice and things of that nature. Is that information readily accessible to people who are interested in those respective areas?
I mean, it really is. I mean, to dovetail off of Patrick's point, I mean, literally, this generation has more access to information than any other generation. A literal Google search for what's happening around policing, or what's happening around racial justice issues in New Jersey. The information will come up. People you can connect to will come up. The activity is so fervent now. It is readily available. And to go back to one of your earlier questions and about even how transformation comes, I think is really critical for people who want to get involved and see and touch and feel, is first to realize that systemic change in the United States starts on the state level. Whether it was freedom from slavery, whether it's voting rights, whether it's criminal justice reform, whatever's happening, it starts at the state, and that pressurizes the situation for the federal government. So literally, whether it's in your state or even your local locale, you can get involved the same way. We shouldn't jump right away to federal policy. You should start changing city ordinances. And from city ordinances, start looking to change county ordinances and state law. And that is how you can be involved. And trust me, those circles are very small.
Yeah.
And so you can get involved, and that helps pressurize the situation. And just like everyone can approach people on the city council, you can approach your federal officials.
Yeah, and people need to also recognize that in many instances, the greatest bat that we have on the federal level are the purse strings. So we look for these things even in the Justice and Policing Act. We look for these changes to take place on the state levels as well. The accountability of police officers and the institutions that they work for, and things of that nature. But the federal government will have the purse strings to incentivize the states to do the things that they need to do. The states have purse strings to incentivize the governments below them so it really is an interconnected thing. I want to talk about COVID a second. I know it's not really what we were going to talk about, but it concerns me greatly on two levels. I can't tell if we don't have access to it as a community of color, or if we're not willing to get the vaccine because we either don't think these vaccines mean a hill of beans, don't have access to healthcare, so won't have any respect for vaccines, scared of the experiments that took place, decades ago, that we were experiments were done against us and against our will. What are you seeing out there in the community? And what is it that we need to do to communicate to everybody in our community how important it is to get this community protection through getting the vaccines? And what are we not doing that we should do to get access to them? Let me start with you, Ms. Thornton, because you have interesting colleagues who come out here. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's one way to put it. And
Yeah.
if you're going to address COVID, and we're talking about incarceration as well, being that New Jersey has the biggest racial disparity to incarcerate our Black and brown and red community, the fact that we had 80 people die last year in incarceration of some kind of COVID related issue is a problem, and they're living in and forced to live communally in tighter quarters than anyone is recommending. So it's a little off what you asked, but I think that's another piece that we have to look at, because these people are being released. And if they're being released without being vaccinated, and in some cases barely being tested effectively, then we're just opening and closing doors and putting people in who come from community that is a problem. As far as the vaccine goes overall in our communities, I mean, I live in the city of Trenton, and it's been a slow process. It's been a painfully slow process to get the vaccine here and to get it accessible to anyone who wants it. Now, your point to whether our community will accept it and take it, I think is very valid. What I know, being indigenous myself, we're unlikely to be real trusting of something that moved through this quickly. I mean, I've heard it from many people that we'll wait a while and see how everybody reacts, and then we'll jump on. I hear it every single day.
Yeah, that is exactly one of the misinformation campaigns that have taken place.
Correct.
Because while we see that the vaccine became available rather quickly, the technology and the science that went into that and the testing that went into it, and that is not something that happened really quickly. But
Right.
it is the history of experiences with pandemics, viruses that have been unique and problematic for large populations, that allowed us to get there as quickly as we did. We could have gotten there quicker, even more so in terms of making it available, had the former administration acknowledged the fact that it was indeed a pandemic and that it needed to be addressed. Mr. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the whole issue of incarceration and a bill that I'm particularly sponsoring that would prohibit the use of for-profit prisons, because I think that has something to do with the decarceration. I also think that there are efforts to decarcerate right now people because of the COVID, but it's not moving fast enough.
I would agree.
Not moving fast enough. Mr. Hall, what is your experience with the community in response to the access to the COVID and whether or not they will, in fact, get the vaccine? And Reverend Boyer, what is it you think that the churches could do to encourage its congregants, even though you're worshiping virtually a lot now, to trust in this vaccine and how important it is to our community protection. Mr. Holland,
Well,
and then Mr. Boyer.
thank you. I have a wide range because we work with so many different organizations. Plus, I run 4 different businesses myself, one of them being a general contractor. And it seems like a lot of the Hispanics, especially the ones who are afraid that if they participate in anything where they may possibly be deported. And
The immigration issues, yeah.
exactly. So that's a huge issue in some of the really inner cities of Trenton. And these individuals, they're to the point now where it's hard for them to trust anyone other than their own self. And so, so one of the things we talked about is maybe it's possible we can have certain areas set up where these individuals can get this injection through individuals that they really trust. And so I don't know how that can work, but that's what we're seeing in that end. And then we're also seeing in some of the spiritual sectors where people are saying, well, it's the mark of the beast and things of that nature. And they're not taking it because they think it's that. And then there's other sectors where we're seeing where people think that it has a lot to do with G5. And so they're actually putting something in us that we can be tracked and things of that nature. So that's very real out there in the streets. It's extremely real. And then a lot of folks are just sort of laying back, that we noticed, saying, I'm waiting to see if someone drops dead. I'm waiting to see what's happening. And they're basically waiting to see if something happens to everyone else before they jump into it. So those are all the things that we're seeing. But this is something that over the past 4 or 5 weeks, we're starting to see even some of those stronghold people loosen up and saying, well, I'm starting to feel a little bit more confidence now. I'm starting to feel like, okay, all right, let's see. My cousin just got it and I'm watching her, so we're starting to see that go. But I think the more and more success that people who have gotten it would come out and say how it was, and everything is fine, and everything is normal, and I think the more confidence it will build with everyone else.
Trusted voices are very important here.
Yes,
absolutely.
Word of mouth.
Yeah. And so that's where kind of the faith-based community can become very helpful as well. Reverend?
That's right. I mean, Patrick hit the nail on the head. We are throughout congregations, and folks were very hesitant, but definitely starting to see folks, because people they trust have taken it, other people in the congregation, family members, people are becoming more accepting. And so access and quantity of the vaccine, I think, is the biggest issue now, because if it's available, more and more people will take it. Acceptance is starting to open up. We've done a lot of work around this. So one, faith communities, as many as possible, have to get the word, have to have credible doctors and scientists, and have discussions with your congregations and your clergy circles. That has been the greatest thing. We've had multiple discussions. We've had Dr. Purnell. We've had the head of the head of the AME Health Commission on to discuss. We've got a piece coming out soon with Dr. Poonam Aleg, who used to be part of the Obama administration and also headed up the health administration here, to get those voices out. And then as clergy saying, we trust them, we know them, right. We are taking it now. You know us, you trust us. Now you can make an informed decision. And we have not shied away from any of the hard questions. And what people have walked away from those sessions saying, I feel more confident about this now because I wasn't shamed, because I had questions and hesitancy, and every question I had was answered, and these people have taken it. And so the best thing churches can do is get the word out, tamp down the rumors with credible information and credible messengers. And the other piece is, and the administration is working towards this, but it needs to be done in much more of a massive way. Do vaccinations in churches and community spaces with trusted community embedded messengers who get it in those spaces so people see them.
Saw that truck pull out today with the Johnson and Johnson vaccines in it, and I was really excited because now we're going to have 3 vaccines, and pretty soon we'll probably have 4. And the Commissioner of Health said the other night on a teleconference that we had, we could conceivably reach community protection, aka herd immunity. I just hate that terminology, herd immunity. Immunity kind of reminds me of cattle. But we could achieve it as early as the beginning of June, maybe even late May, which would be great. I want to shift gears a little bit now. I have a bill that I have introduced as one of the first bills that I introduced in Congress that would prohibit the federal government from using for-profit prisons, because we've recognized that this country, representing less than 10% of the population, has like 20 or 30% of the incarcerated population. We are an over-incarcerating country, let alone state, Ms. Thornton. One of the cottages industries that has grown up are these non-governmental for-profit halfway houses, prisons, things of that nature. And we think that they're all about the bottom line. So while we already don't think that government-sponsored prisons provide the best in education and preparation and healthcare and things of that nature, we think that when your bottom line is how much money you're going to make, you even give poorer care. And so I am wondering, what do you think our community would respond to if we started having discussions around that area?
I think that was for me, so I'll start. We, here in the city of Trenton, we have a couple of for-profit halfway house and assessment centers. And I've been in one of them in my time, and you're absolutely right. You know, the minute you put the bottom line of making money before the treatment of humans goes down. It's simply a fact. And, you know, even hooking into our state prisons, you know, telecommunications that is based on profit, and, you know, everything that is based on profit means that the humans are less than the bottom line. You're 100% right, and I'm fully in support of eliminating the profit motive in all prison uses.
Yeah.
Be it services or actual keeping of people in cages.
Both on the state level and on the federal level, on the state level in New Jersey and on the federal level through the next step legislation. We're trying to target things like the preparation of people to move back into society. My husband used to say all the time, it's not reentry. They've never been a part of society.
Right.
It's really they're entering. Making sure that there's literacy training so that they can read at their age level, and making sure they have access to the healthcare, learning crafts. You know, we're not doing enough rehabilitation and preparation. We're not doing enough anger management, how to portray yourself as a potentially good employee. We're not doing enough to ensure that your family and you are able to connect while you're in prison, because I mean the ridiculousness of the cost just to make a call. Now, I mean, you all know my story. I had 2 sons in Yardville at the same time for a mistake that they made, and they had to pay for that mistake. But my husband and I made a decision that every week that we were in the state of New Jersey, we were going to go see them. And they were subjected to some harassment until they finally made arrangements for my husband and I to see our sons kind of like separately off. But we had to constantly remind our sons, you don't belong to this. You made a mistake. You're paying for that mistake, but you belong to us. And so some of the reforms in the next step legislations make sure if there's no alternative to your incarceration and you must be incarcerated, then they need to take into consideration where your family is. Make sure that you're able to interact with your family, either, like you and I are interacting right now, or be close enough so that they can visit. All of those kinds of things. Make sure the mothers can maintain the bond with their children, etc. And it's that kind of thing. How do we, as legislators, have this kind of legislation in the hopper? Get the kind of impetus from the community that we need to create the kind of energy and convincing of the system, like they did with the Policing Justice and Policing Act, to take on some of this really kind of, we don't think it's so bold, but it is perceived as being very bold. Let me go to you, Patrick, and then you, Ms. Thornton. Huh?
I'm glad you said this, because of all the years of working together, it's almost like when you're running a meeting and you want to get some people involved in the organization or the mission. All you have to do is give them a responsibility, give them something to do, and they'll be more involved. So my thing is, we look at it from a different point of view. We feel like we need more citizen oversight boards. If we had more citizen oversight boards that had teeth, that have power, not just some that have power, whether it's the solitary confinement situation that we've been dealing with for years, or a situation that controls policing, or whatever the case may be, as long as you have more citizens involved and have power, I think a lot of these issues will be greatly addressed in that issue. So those are the areas that we're working in.
Let me commend you to the Next Step Act. Look it up. It has a lot of those issues in it, as well as some others, because we want our community to become more engaged and educated in it, because it affects our community disproportionately. Ms. Thornton, you had your...
Yeah, and I was just going to say, when you talk justice in policing, you have to realize that, particularly specifically in the state of New Jersey, corrections officers fought to be seen as corrections police officers. So they have to be held to the same standard and have justice in their policing actions as well. I'm sure you've heard about what's happening recently in the women's facility here.
I did.
And that, to Patrick's point, oversight is desperately needed, both citizen and other, because there's a culture. When you talk about mass incarceration, there's a culture of people having control of humans that goes all the way back to slavery. It's looked at in the same way, that we're property. We have numbers. So, when you talk justice in policing, you cannot eliminate the policing that goes on behind the walls.
You're absolutely right. And I think that there's a great opportunity for a whole bunch of reforming to take place even while in prison. I mean,
Yes,
at
ma'am.
prison, yes, you pay the penalty for your infraction, but it's supposed to be rehabilitative, because the overwhelming majority of people who are in prison come home. And so when they come home, you want them to be participating citizens who contribute to the tax base and everything else, not have to be, dependent upon the tax base for them to survive. I know we're just about out of time, and I want to give each of you an opportunity to say, to close out. I want you to tell me, what is it that you need from someone like me to keep our community engaged, to help our people who were so active and who got out there and voted in an incredible number, how not to get discouraged because things aren't happening as quickly, helping them to understand the wheels of government and helping them to understand there's no such thing as a perfect piece of legislation. We always have to make some kind of sacrifice or compromise in order to get things done. Tell me what you need from people like me to be able to keep our communities informed of the direction in which we're going. I'll start with you.
Yeah. So one is to continue having forums like this, which are very helpful. And two is work with grassroots organizers and organizations the same way you would a campaign, because each of these issues requires a campaign. And to some of the earlier dialogue about how to keep people activated in these things, one is that our job as organizations should be to work with folks who are most impacted around any particular situation, and to get at the grassroots organizing and capacity building. And protest are best when they are targeted and they are not, they don't just spontaneously erupt, but that they are targeted at particular times to create political pressure in order to move a bill forward. So work with the organizing campaign, the organizing entities, just like it's a campaign, and march that piece of legislation all the way to the finish line.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Hall?
I thought Lydia was gonna.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Lydia.
go ahead,
Ms.
Patrick.
Thornton?
No.
Oh, okay. I totally agree with Reverend. And second thing is, I believe that you guys as legislators have to really rethink the kind of information and how you put information out about educating, especially the younger folks, on what's happening in the process. And I totally agree in terms of having it or looking at it like a campaign, because the newer generations, they're not changing. They have changed. Everything is so shortened. It's so quick. It's so, and unless you're in the streets and the height of the younger generation's activity, you really don't understand exactly how much it has changed and where they are. And so I think that the traditional ways of educating and informing individuals, I think it's still fine for people on my level. But I think people who are below my level, talking about 40 and I would say 35, but 40 and younger, they are on a total different page.
How do I communicate? How do we communicate with them then? Do we do it with the podcast? Do we do it with these, sort of virtual meetings? What do we do?
Well, the way we do it is we have rap and spoken word contests where they come up with social justice poetry and things like that, where they listen to one another. We have one-on-one Facebook time, Instagram time with individuals who are in the streets that are really talking about exactly what's happening, and they have the knowledge that we've given them, and they turn that into the language that their peers can understand. And it may not be so understandable to us, but it's understandable to them. And we allow them to do this in their own words, because what we consider to be cuss words now, believe it or not, is a common word for the younger generation now. It's not a cuss word. It's not disrespectful. And unfortunately, that's what the majority of these young folks are attracted to. They understand and they get it. As long as they get our message and what we're trying to portray to them, we're fine. But we just allow them to do it on their terms and in their language, and we don't try to control it. So that's what I'm saying, that I think that legislation ought to be doing.
That's very interesting. I mean, there are two words that come to mind immediately that I think undervalue women and Black folks. And maybe I'm just old, but I do have issues with those two words. One starts with the N and the other one starts with the B. Yeah. And they say something. They connote a value or a devalue. And I don't think our young people understand that history. They just think it's a cool word. And I think that to some extent, we could help them to understand the history of that. Ms. Thornton, you're almost going to get the last word here.
And I thank you for that. And I would fully back both what Patrick and what Reverend Boyer said, and add one phrase that I was taught a few years ago that I kind of live by, and that's that those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution.
Yes.
So, with talking to our young people, with going out in the streets and meeting people where they are, I think events like this, social media is the obvious communication tool at this point. The value of this pandemic, in a really odd and interesting way, has been to give us this Zoom platform and all these platforms that people can meet on and be a part of without ever leaving their house.
Yeah.
And it has expanded people like yourself's range of who they can interact with and see and meet in exponential ways. And your question, I think, came to the point of how do you, as a legislator who sits in Washington and to a lot of our young seems maybe a bit removed from the city of Trenton or the city of Camden or wherever, how do you communicate with us? You use people like Jossie, who is brilliant at what she's doing. And you also hold events like this that can be watched and rewatched and forwarded, and that aren't just, let's have a town hall at place A. And so I thank you for taking the time and the interest to do this. And I think more of this gets more of what you're trying to do out.
So I think you're reading my mind, because while I was thinking that this pandemic has had its good as well as its bad, and this ability to communicate, set up these kinds of conversations has been really helpful, and helpful in getting the word out, helpful in having conversations with people you don't ordinarily get. This 1-on-3 is a real conversation. And the other thing that you read my mind about is that this was Jossie's idea. I met Jossie on the steps of Trenton Central High School at a demonstration that she helped to coordinate against gun violence. And I looked to Andrew Bobbitt and said, I don't know who that young woman is, but I want to get to meet her. And then I got to meet her and I said, I want to hire her. I want to help her to grow to be what she has the intellectual and heartfelt capacity to be. And I'm so glad that she's part of our team, because she loves Trenton. She truly is an activist, and she truly has respect for our community, just like you do. And so let me thank Jossie, because I know she's in the background somewhere. You can't see her face, how proud I am of her. But let me thank each and every one of you for taking the time with me today, but for the work that you're doing in the community. And when things come up and you think that we should convene a virtual interaction, I don't know what else to call it, please arrange it with the office. If I'm not available, James G's available. If he's not available, Jossie will be available. But whoever is available, we're going to share that information anyway. And we're going to promise you that we'll do our very best to respond to the needs that are established in our community. God bless you. Keep us all safe. Keep us masked up, hands washed, and safe distance. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good to see y'all.
Bye-bye.